Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our 2021 Proclamation of National Crime Victims' Rights Week. As one of the few nonprofits in DC and even around the country that is dedicated to crime victims' rights services, Network for Victim Recovery of DC is delighted to welcome our audience and our speakers today. And I'm Bridget Stump, and I'm honored to lead our organization in partnership with our dedicated staff and board as the co-founder and executive director at NVRDC. And as we approach our 10th year as an organization, I am thrilled to host DC's first National Crime Victims' Rights Week recognition resolution. We have seen incredible progress over the past decade in how DC is investing to better support survivors of crime. Our advocates and attorneys have forged new ways of both championing for survivors' needs and ensuring accountability over those who are tasked with responding to crime by ensuring that the rights of survivors are afforded. One of the things that we are most proud of at NVRDC is that we have taken leadership to both innovate and partner to better respond to survivors' wide-ranging needs, recognizing that there is no one perspective of survivor-defined justice, and that for many marginalized survivors, some of the traditional responses to harm are not safe places to engage. This was the motivation behind the launch of our Restorative Justice Project for sexual assault survivors. We recognize that the unaddressed consequences of trauma are far-reaching on individuals, their families, employers, and the larger community. Therefore, we have committed to an approach in victim services that is guided by our core values of innovation, equity and allyship, and sustainable passion. At NVRDC, we are also committed to providing empowering services for those who are harmed by crime, shifting our larger culture to enhance how systems promote justice and healing, and working to transform systems so that they better serve survivors in more equitable ways that are responsive to their needs. We know that there is no better expert on what creates healing than the individual who was harmed. We also recognize that unaddressed trauma often leads to more community harm. And this past year has created unimaginable challenges for both survivors and providers who serve them. In addition to a global pandemic, communities are experiencing a necessary reckoning to our country's long history of racism. We are proud of the ways in which we have seen local leaders respond to improve the health and safety of all DC residents by investing in policies that address inequities and uplift meaningful opportunities to thrive in our community. For our proclamation event, we are honored and grateful to have several local DC leaders with us to share remarks on their views of the most pressing issues affecting the district's crime victims, as well as legislation and initiatives that they have supported and led. We hope that this event will help as a way to learn about crime victims' rights issues in the district and also to better understand what local leaders are doing to address them. So to begin our event today, I'd like to welcome DC Councilmember Charles Allen, who will be reading today's proclamation and providing remarks. Councilmember Allen represents Ward 6. He also serves the chair of the council's committee on the Judiciary and Public Safety, and has been one of the strongest advocates of DC survivors. In his time as chair, Councilmember Allen has led the council in strengthening the district's laws around criminal justice, as well as taken important steps to create meaningful rehabilitation and reentry into the community while expanding services for victims and survivors of crime. Welcome today. We're so happy to have you.
Hi everyone, it's Ward 6 Councilmember Charles Allen, also the chair of the council's Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. And this week is Crime Victims' Rights Week. I want to thank all of the advocates, the powerful voices of victims and survivors, as we all work hard to make sure we are recognizing, respecting, and helping heal and seek justice for survivors and victims of crime in our city. This council has recognized the week of April 18th through the 24th as Crime Victims' Rights Week. We passed a resolution to name it such, and so I wanted to present this resolution. We have to do this virtually, so I'm going to read the resolution and really want to present this to all of the amazing people who advocate and work on behalf of victims and survivors every single day in our city. So thank you all very much. And let me read the resolution and virtually present it to you. So this declares the week of April 18th through the 24th, 2021 as Crime Victims' Rights Week in the District of Columbia. And whereas preserving and improving the dignity and safety of all residents will contribute to a vibrant and healthy District of Columbia, and whereas there are victims of 20 million crimes in the United States annually, and each crime impacts both individuals and communities, and whereas the district must help victims access the justice, assistance, and support they need to heal and rebuild their lives, and whereas many victims face barriers such as isolation, distrust of government, language access, transportation access, and cultural barriers that keep them from accessing the services and criminal legal processes that can help them recover from crime. And whereas reaching and serving all victims of crime is essential in supporting thriving communities, because those who receive holistic services and supports are much more likely to remain invested in their communities. And whereas with the unwavering support of their communities and victim service providers behind them, survivors will be empowered to face their grief, loss, fear, anger, and hope without fear of judgment, and will feel understood, heard, and respected. And whereas the district must expand the circle of those prepared to respond to victims and link them to the resources that can help them recover. And whereas engaging in a broad array of healthcare providers, community leaders, faith organizations, educators, businesses can provide new links between victims and services that improve their safety, healing, and access to justice. And whereas crime victims' rights laws passed here in the district, including through the DC Crime Victims Bill of Rights, and at the federal level through the Crime Victims' Rights Act, have provided victims with ways to meaningfully participate in criminal legal processes. And whereas the rights of crime victims are best protected when all participants in the criminal legal process are appropriately educated about those rights and accountable to the community. And whereas supporting victims of crime is crucial in the criminal legal system because such support honors the experience of victims and allows them to find autonomy and empowerment through achieving self-defined goals. And whereas advocacy by and for victims of crime is itself a form of seeking justice, it is equally important to justice sought through the courts or alternative means such as restorative justice processes. And whereas the accomplishments of the victims' rights movement, achieved through compassion and collaboration, built on the courageous advocacy of individual victims and their families across the country, inspire in us hope for future progress and greater healing. And whereas the district must respond to crime and violence by helping victims find not only support, recovery, and justice, but also hope for their future. And whereas Crime Victims' Rights Week provides an opportunity to recommit ourselves to ensuring that accessible, appropriate, and trauma-informed services are offered to all victims of crime. And whereas the District of Columbia is dedicated to strengthening victims in the aftermath of crime, building resilience within our communities and among those serving crime victims, and bring hope and healing to all victims and survivors. Therefore, it's resolved by the Council of the District of Columbia that this resolution may be cited as the Crime Victims' Rights Week Recognition Resolution of 2021, and the Council of the District of Columbia declares the week of April 18th to 24th, 2021 as Crime Victims' Rights Week in the District of Columbia. My thanks again to everybody who helped serve our victims and survivors, and deep thanks as well, of course, to survivors and victims themselves for the voice they bring, for the power they bring, and for the change that they help create. So thank you all very much, and I appreciate and want to help honor and recognize this as Crime Victims' Rights Week.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. You have always been a strong advocate for crime victims in the district, and we greatly appreciate your leadership and support. I'd like to now turn to our other speakers who all have dedicated their efforts as public servants to support survivors. You are going to hear about their initiatives happening throughout the district as they champion to empower and support crime victims. We will begin with DC Attorney General Karl Racine, a long-standing partner of NVRDC and a champion for DC residents and survivors, followed by Director Linda Harllee Harper of the newly formed DC Office on Gun Violence Prevention. We will then turn to our DC council members representing several wards throughout the district. We are honored to have council members Brianne Nadeau from Ward 1, Brooke Pinto from Ward 2, and Mary Cheh from Ward 3. I am excited to turn it over to Attorney General Racine to get us started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karl Racine, Attorney General for the District of Columbia. Thank you for having me for NVRDC's National Crime Victims' Rights Week Proclamation event. Let me begin by saying that the Office of Attorney General is a proud partner of NVRDC. This organization does extraordinary and admirable work to provide victims of crimes with the services that they need to seek redress and to repair the harm that they've been caused. NVRDC is critical to the Office of Attorney General's elder justice work, which focuses on ensuring that the district's elders and vulnerable adults are treated equitably, fairly, compassionately, and receive justice when they are harmed. OAG's public interest and public safety divisions work closely with NVRDC's special project, DC Trove. DC Trove is a multidisciplinary team of government agencies, enforcement personnel, prosecutors, and local courts seeking to improve the response to the 7,000 seniors experiencing abuse in the District of Columbia every year. Together, we've trained over 350 MPD officers and detectives, as well as many other community leaders and service providers who interact with older survivors and have helped drive local policy changes that have greatly impacted how we address the financial exploitation of our seniors. This team was instrumental in the creation and passage of legislation that created new criminal and civil penalties to ensure that justice is rendered to those who would harm our seniors. To take a moment to briefly highlight some of the work that the Office of Attorney General is doing in the restorative justice area, an area that I know NVRDC is also committed to. In an effort to increase public safety and decrease juvenile crime, we've worked to protect the district and to rehabilitate youth who come into contact with the criminal justice system by taking a smart on-crime approach to juvenile justice, addressing trauma and the root causes of crime, empowering victims and holding young offenders accountable through restorative justice, and partnering with our neighboring jurisdictions like Prince George's County. In 2017, my office established our restorative justice program, the first of its kind within a prosecutor's office. Since that time, the program has held over 150 mediations. The purpose of the restorative justice program is to provide crime victims with an opportunity to address the person who harmed them in a safe setting, a controlled conversation that is facilitated by trained mediators and restorative justice facilitators. The process gives victims agency to control the outcome of their experience as a crime victim and to come to resolution and healing through a conversation with the very person who harmed them. And restorative justice gives youthful offenders a much needed opportunity to demonstrate accountability, to show remorse, and develop empathy for the person they harmed. The data shows that this kind of process results in cognitive recognition in juveniles, such that they understand the harm that they've caused. The powerful restorative justice conferences promote healing and a path towards overcoming trauma caused by criminal behavior for both the victim and the perpetrator. A preliminary analysis shows that young people who have participated in this type of program are 15% less likely to reoffend than young people who go through the traditional juvenile justice system. What's more, the victims who participate in restorative justice, overwhelmingly, 96%, would recommend it to other victims of crime. Allow me, please, to tell you one more aspect of the Office of Attorney General's work. As president of the National Association of Attorneys General, my presidential initiative is focused on combating hate. In doing that work, standing up for humanity, we have focused on best practices to educate young people as well as older people about our country's legacy of hate. And importantly, we've also committed to lifting up the voices of survivors of hate crimes. Through these efforts, we join our partners in NVRDC in giving victims the kind of support and opportunity they need to repair the harm and trauma that they have felt. On behalf of all of my colleagues at the Office of Attorney General, I want to thank NVRDC, its exceptional leadership, for all the work that it does every single day to protect our victims of crime and to help them get back on their feet. Thank you, NVRDC.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Harper, and I'm the Gun Violence Prevention Director for the District of Columbia. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm happy to meet all of you, although this is not an ideal situation. To meet people, certainly we know that this has not been an ideal year. I'm honored to be able to share with you the District of Columbia's gun violence prevention effort. We acknowledge all of the Washingtonians that we have lost to gun violence. And we know that we need to do something to stop the bleeding. The district has decided to launch a gun violence emergency operations center. We are known as Building Blocks DC. What we've done is use an emergency management infrastructure, joined it with gun violence prevention services in the district in order to create a whole of government approach. It's the first of its kind in the country. And what we're seeking to do is to create a coordinated effort among all of the district government agencies. What we know is that the District of Columbia is a resource-rich city. We have lots of resources. We have tons of nonprofits and tons of organizations that are doing amazing work. We also have government agencies that are working very hard to improve the lives of Washingtonians. However, we also know that it's not a coordinated effort. What we have done in the district is identify the top 151 most violent blocks through a data-driven approach. The District of Columbia is using a public health approach to coordinate all of the resources in the District of Columbia and to focus them on communities and people that are most in need. What we know is that a small number of people in the district are creating the most violence in our communities, and we know that a small number of communities are hardest hit by violence. What we are seeking to do is to coordinate efforts to be laser focused on those people and those places to offer services, supports, and opportunities in a streamlined and expedited way in an effort to offer alternatives to picking up the gun effort. We are in partnership with the Metropolitan Police Department, and I am so encouraged about the recent appointment of Chief Robert Conte. Chief Conte and I know and agree that we cannot arrest and incarcerate our way out of the gun violence issue. We know that we want to offer services, supports, and opportunities to those who are most in need. And Chief Conte is in full support of Building Blocks offering those service supports and opportunities to the focused people in the focused communities that we are serving. In Building Blocks, what we know is that the government is not the answer. We know that we need to support our communities. We know that our communities know what they need best. We know that we need to support the shooters. We know that we need to be in communication and engage with those who are bringing and wreaking havoc in their community. Building Blocks DC engages people most at risk of becoming a victim or a perpetrator of gun violence and focuses our initial efforts on working with individuals who have been repeatedly arrested for gun-related offenses, are under active supervision by our agencies in the criminal justice system, or have been directly impacted by gun violence and or have experienced the ripple effects of gun violence. Building Blocks DC will work to create individualized wraparound plans for support, including housing, career, and workplace readiness, mental health care, academic support, and other government services. We know that the government cannot solve the problems in our communities. What we're doing is seeking out the organizations and the residents that are having a positive impact on the communities. We are listening to the communities and seeking to see how government support can help to expand the capacity of those who are already doing the work in the communities. We have so many people in the district who are doing this very important work. Very competent and qualified and talented people. But we know unless we're coordinated in our efforts, we are not going to have the same impact. So our goal is that we're going to focus all of our efforts, the government, the community, neighborhood-based organizations, residents, focus them all our resources on these communities. Building Blocks DC will be taking a whole of government approach in partnership with our most impacted communities to address the urgent needs of our residents and to co-create safe places. The Gun Violence Prevention Emergency Operations Center will be our infrastructure, creating a process to coordinate our collective action. The Gun Violence Prevention Center will be staffed by a team of DC government leaders who specialize in emergency management, government services, housing, job training, mental health, and social services. The Building Blocks DC program is funded with an initial investment of $15 million that the mayor announced on February 17th to be used for the remainder of this fiscal year. What we also know is that the mayor is going to be committing even more resources to gun violence prevention in the next upcoming year. We are busy coordinating services and setting up streamlined and expedited methods for our people. In the Gun Violence Emergency Operations Center, or in Building Blocks, we are calling the persons that we work with people of promise. We are not going to give up on them. Our goal is to work with them and to continue to work with them in a relentless effort to offer services and supports and opportunities. We are working with the street outreach workers that we have in the District of Columbia, our violence interrupters, to serve as a bridge to those persons of promise. We know that the existing relationships can help be the bridge to the city services and the neighborhood organizations who are seeking to do the work. We are so encouraged by the amount of support that Building Blocks has received since its inception. We have faith leaders, community-based organizations, residents, community leaders, pillars of our community who want to all get behind this effort so that we can all work together collectively to end gun violence in the District of Columbia. Building Blocks DC is a place-based, data-driven approach that uses comprehensive block-by-block analysis to pinpoint specific areas where gun violence is regularly happening in our city. Using 2020 crime data, what we have done is identify 151 blocks that represent nearly 2% of all blocks in the District of Columbia, but were the site of 41% of the gun violence in the district. The Building Blocks DC program has launched the efforts in our pilot community, which has been identified as historic Anacostia. We are working hard now to bring the resources and supports to that community in an effort to combat gun violence. We are working hard 7 days a week to stand up the Emergency Operations Center and look for seeing a positive impact as we approach the warmer months. Thank you so much for having us here, and I'm happy to come back, and I hope that I can address you again to give you an update on our efforts. Thank you for listening.
Good evening. I am Ward 1 Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, and I am so happy to be joining you virtually tonight. I want to thank the Network for Victim Recovery of DC for inviting me to join this year's National Crime Victims' Rights Week celebration. As chair of the Committee on Human Services, I am intensely focused on serving our most vulnerable residents, and sometimes that means victims of crime. My work focuses in on folks who are experiencing homelessness, unaccompanied minors, women, children, and families who need extra support to build their lives here in the District of Columbia. And tied into that work is the work of public safety. In the District of Columbia, I'm very proud to be one of the council members who pushed us to be taking a public health approach to public safety when we passed the NEAR Act several years ago. There is still so much more work to be done and so many more investments to be made, but at its heart and at its core, it means that we are treating survivors of violence as people who have a whole host of needs that the government can step up to provide, that community partners should be providing, that when someone is impacted by violence, they should have the supports they need to rebuild their lives. We know that treating public safety as a public health issue means we treat it like a disease. We know that it impacts not only the victim of violence, but also their friends, their family, their block, their neighborhood, their entire community. And we must bring the resources that speak to that to solve these issues. I'm so excited to see a partner in the White House, President Biden, announcing his public safety plans last week. He talked about the need for deep deep investments in violence prevention, just like we're doing here in the District of Columbia. And he also talked about the red flag law, which I was so proud to have authored here in the District of Columbia. That's our extreme risk protection order. So when we know someone is going to commit an act of violence against themselves or someone else, we can remove the firearm from that person's possession. We can keep that person safe. We can keep that community safe. And even though the district has been working so hard on these issues, if we don't have national leadership, we cannot succeed because we need all the jurisdictions around us to be on the same page. So that's probably the most exciting news. And, you know, I'm going to continue this work, whether it's authoring the Alimony Justice for Injured Spouses Amendment Act to ensure that no victim of domestic violence ever has to pay alimony to the person that was abusing them, or the advocacy for funding the DC Safe Space Crisis Shelter. We so desperately need it. And I'm thrilled that it's now being built. I'm going to continue supporting funding for unaccompanied minors and young women and children who are victims of sex trafficking or could become victims of sex trafficking, supporting parent groups through the Child and Family Services Agency that I oversee as the department of the chair, as the Department of the Committee on Human Services. So I will keep fighting for these funds and these programs and for better laws here in the District of Columbia. I want to thank you for all you're doing to help our residents and affirm that I remain committed to serve alongside you. We have more work to do to better protect our residents, but I know that we can do it together. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. I am Brooke Pinto, council member representing Ward 2 on the DC Council. And I am so proud to join the Network for Victim Recovery of DC today. Thank you to the host of individuals and organizations commemorating this year's National Crime Victims' Rights Week, which happens to be taking place during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Established in 1981, the National Crime Victims' Rights Week has provided us with a dedicated time frame each year over the last 40 years to raise awareness about victimization and its effects on individuals and families, their friends, and their communities. And also to highlight the laws, programs, and policies that will help these survivors and their families lead fruitful and productive lives while on the path to a full recovery. This year's theme, Support Victims, Build Trust, Engage Communities, highlights the importance of leveraging and relying upon our community in doing this important work together. A lesson that is especially poignant as we navigate what we hope is the end of a year-long global health pandemic. When I think further about this year's theme and take time to reflect on NVRDC's mission statement to empower victims of all crimes to achieve survivor-defined justice through a collaborative continuum of advocacy, case management, and legal services, I think about my duty as a public servant and elected official to not only respond after a crime has already taken place, but to work proactively to address the root causes of violence and crime in our city, and to pull together all available resources, both public and private, to help put in place reinforceable mechanisms to help reduce the amount of crime that we see experienced in the first place. In my previous role as an Assistant Attorney General at the District of Columbia's Office of the Attorney General, I had the opportunity to meet with victims who bravely shared their stories and fought not only for justice in their own case, but for longer-term solutions for their neighbors and so they don't have to go through what they or their families had gone through. And this was a level of commitment and courage that has always been and continues to be incredibly moving to me in my work. And now on the council, I have been very vocal about the need to improve upon our public safety, and I've been successful in my endeavors to bring more public infrastructure in the form of street lighting and surveillance cameras to dark and heavily populated areas throughout my ward, not only to deter bad actors, but also to afford all of our residents and patrons, particularly our women, to feel safe when walking alone or even in smaller groups. I've also been supportive of measures such as the Bella Evangelist and Tony Hunter panic defense prohibition legislation, which protects members of the LGBTQIA+ community from harmful actions. And I also remain committed to protecting our elders from bad actors, predators who may try to take advantage of their financial assets or even deceive them into selling their homes, ultimately disrupting the flow of financial stability to and through their generations. And we continue to see a huge amount of elder abuse cases in sexual exploitation as well. Given the breadth of work that we do in government, it is so important that we have trained, empathetic, and dedicated partners with whom we can work to expand our reach and touch even more lives across our city. My pledge is to always remain a listening ear and be a strong advocate for legislation and policies that will enable us to continue supporting victims of crimes and their families. Victims suffer continuing trauma, and our criminal justice system and broader society must be proactive as we offer supports and opportunities for healing and rebuilding. In closing, I would like to give a special thanks to the Network for Victims Recovery of DC for all of the work you do to uplift and empower our community, and for bringing together this proclamation event. From the bottom of my heart and on behalf of all of the residents of Ward 2, thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Councilmember Mary Cheh, and I represent Ward 3 on the Council of the District of Columbia. Today's proclamation declaring the 40th anniversary of National Crime Victims' Rights Week comes at a vital time, an important moment in our country as we seek to recover from the most devastating viral outbreak of our time. Also a time when we're confronting the horrible harms of systemic racism and bigotry in a world largely built to benefit very few, while at the same time denying opportunities and equal treatment and even a base level of safety for others. But during this time of turmoil and uncertainty, there's a remarkable opportunity, I think, to rebuild and to innovate, to make substantive changes in the pursuit of our idealized image of what the world could be. In the near future, the Council of the District of Columbia will be considering the many recommendations in the Police Revision Commission's report. It's called Decentralizing Police to Improve Safety. And at the crux of this report is the notion that if we more narrowly tailor the scope of policing responsibilities and the role of the police, then we'll be better able to instead enhance and expand the role of our other proven community-centered services, our mental health services, our violence prevention efforts, our victim survivor services, and so on. And while we'll need a police response for immediate public safety threats, this new approach is largely an attempt at reinvestment in our advocacy community. It signals a reinvestment in you, our healthcare providers, our mental health specialists, our social workers, our violence interrupters, the education system, and the many people who work in victim and survivor services. And that's why I hope, that this 40th anniversary will be the start of something new, an approach where our attention and financial resources are centered around the types of interventions and services that reduce and prevent crimes, stop them from occurring in the first place, and also better support a more complete recovery for the victims of crime and violence. There's an incredible task in front of us because we're effectively rewriting the playbook, and we need you to play a central role in this process. Who better to help guide these reforms than you, our survivors and professional community? You have the vital knowledge and expertise that we need to develop new, substantive policies for emergency response services. And perhaps most importantly, you know what's needed to rebuild and recover from some of life's most devastating and damaging experiences. This year's National Crime Victims' Rights Week theme is Support Victims, Build Trust, Engage Communities. And I hope you consider this my invitation to engage those of us on the Council as we embark on the next steps to realize this vision of having a safe and just world for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Racine, for your leadership and support. I would also like to thank Director Harllee Harper for telling us more about Building Blocks DC. Thank you to Council members Nadeau, Pinto, and Cheh. We loved hearing a deep understanding of how safe and stable housing is a critical foundation to both prevent and respond to the needs of survivors, and the recognition that we must invest in the root causes of violence to truly address the holistic needs survivors have. We are grateful for the efforts we heard to support LGBTQ survivors, and I loved hearing our partners working in violence interruption and seeing their efforts uplifted. We agree that it is imperative to invest in social infrastructure as a healing response to violence. We rely on our leaders to ensure adequate investments in the safety nets that both help respond to survivors' needs and also create healthier, safer communities. I want to offer a special thanks to all of those survivors who have trusted us to support them in their healing journeys. Thank you to the NVRDC staff behind the scenes, making everything about today possible. And thank you to all the guests who joined us for this event. NVRDC is thankful that DC has been a leader in driving criminal legal reform that uplifts the dignity of all those who interact with the criminal legal system. We look forward to a continued conversation and action that really reimagines how we can respond to violence with alternative paths and community investments. And as we close out the event, I invite you all to do your part in commemorating National Crime Victims' Rights Week. It's easy, just visit nvrdc.org and you can learn more about crime victims' rights in the district. Thank you so much and enjoy your week.